Funeral organizers of Reddit. What are the weirdest or most unique funerals you have organized? I've been in the funeral industry for over 10 years, and most services I've arranged have been run-of-the-mill. Most people seem to want similar things, but one service will always stand out to me. A family asked us to play some hardcore gangster rap for their mother/grandmother at her service, and we happily obliged. I can't remember the name of the song, but it had heavy themes of murder, drug use, and pretty foul language. Her service was then finished with a recital of the Lord's Prayer. This lady was in her late 80s. When my grandfather died, we had a request we were afraid was odd, but the funeral director told us he'd seen much stranger, so it was okay. My grandfather was big into motorcycles. He had Harleys as long as I can remember, and even after he had his hip surgery, and the doctor told him not to ride anymore, he retooled his bike into a trike so he could still ride. So after he died, my uncle outfitted the trike with a special rig, very secure and very safe, so that we could take him to the cemetery in his coffin on the back of the motorcycle. My uncle drove the motorcycle, while all the members of my grandfather's riding club circled him from the funeral parlor to the cemetery. It was badass and awesome, and I know my grandfather would have loved it. As a funeral music planner and organist, I've worked with families on many funerals to honor special requests. One was a Wizard of Oz themed funeral, where the deceased woman had loved the original movie and requested that music from it be used. Pallbearers and friends of the family dressed in costumes of the principal characters as they entered the church, including dozens of munchkins, Toto, and the witch. There wasn't a dry eye after the eulogy when the soloist sang Over the Rainbow, but many smiles as the coffin was carried out of the church en route to the cemetery as everyone sang, "We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz." The piecemeal burials. My dad was a funeral director in a small town. One day a guy called and said, "I'm going to be dropping off my foot this afternoon." He was like, "What?" The guy was a diabetic and had to get his foot amputated. He had already purchased a burial plot in a local cemetery and wanted his foot to be buried there with the rest of him to follow, eventually. Sure enough, the guy came in a wheelchair with a bug bundle containing his foot. He insisted that my dad embalm it, so he did. It was then buried in his plot. About a year later, the guy calls up again. "I'm going to be bringing over my leg. I needed to embalm it and have it buried." Apparently his diabetes had continued to progress, and they had to amputate the leg opposite of the one that was missing its foot. So, my dad dutifully embalmed it and arranged it to be buried. About another year or so goes by, and the man finally dies. My dad embalmed him and saw to it that he was buried with the rest of the parts, which preceded him in death. Former funeral director. Usually ran the back of the house, but met with families on a few occasions. Met with the parents of a 16-year-old girl who had died in a car crash. Arrangements were tough at first, because how could they not be? We got the official stuff out of the way, and then talked about what she, the deceased, would have wanted. Ended up rearranging the funeral home so that the lobby had crock pots of boiled peanuts and a lounge with the Lion King playing. Inside the main parlor was a purple-themed dance party. The pinnacle of the evening was the girl's mom leading everyone in doing the wiggle. It was amazing, and I'm still floored by this family for being able to really celebrate their daughter's life in that way. I sang in a community choir with a man who was diagnosed with terminal cancer. This choir performed Handel's Messiah every year, and this man was our bass soloist on "The People That Walked in Darkness Have Seen a Great Light." So even though this choir didn't normally sing at church services, his dying request was that we come to his church for the funeral. The minister's text was, "The People That Walked," and we were told to sing all his favorite hymns. While we were tearfully warming up on the day of, the choir director said, he didn't specifically request it, but what if after the recessional we surprised everyone by breaking into the Hallelujah chorus, as a reminder that we'll all be together again someday. So we did. We finished the requested recessional while the pallbearers were recessing, and then burst into Hallelujah before the mourners left. Not a dry eye in the house. A few years ago, when my grandmother died, miss you, Granny, my 2 sisters and 2 cousins were preparing her body for the viewing, as they were all cosmetologists. I should say that my family has a bit of a strange sense of humor, and for anyone that says this might be disrespectful, my granny would have laughed her ass off at this. So anyway, they're putting on all her makeup, and they're playfully arguing over how it should be done. Eventually this escalates into them comparing their own makeup to what they were doing for Granny. They were joking about who did the better job, and to get an accurate description, they were lying down next to the coffin, closing their eyes, and folding their arms on their chest, and the others would compare. They would then adjust both their own makeup and Granny's to get it right. It was at this point that the funeral director walked in. He opened the door, saw my cousin lying on the floor as though she was dead, with the others giddily adjusting Granny's makeup and using my dead cousin as a reference. There was an awkward pause for a few seconds before the girls all burst into laughter. The funeral director was visibly uncomfortable and silently left. After all was said and done, they went to apologize to the director, admitting that they were just having a bit of fun. He said it was all right, just a bit strange. He admitted that he did chuckle a bit as he was walking away. Fast forward to the service. A family friend was giving a eulogy, and the girls are looking at Granny up front in the coffin. They are trying to hold back smirks to each other, and a few people are noticing. They look to the back of the room, where the funeral director is standing. He flashes them a smirk himself, then closes his eyes and pulls his hands to his chest to imitate a dead person in the coffin. Apparently it took everything they had not to burst out laughing on the spot. I am not a funeral organizer, but a control engineer. During a project, I worked with a guy who did the crematorium oven systems, and he had a few good stories. Story 1. A young guy died in a diving accident. His friends and family wanted him to be cremated in his diving suit. The crematorium guys told him they could not do this, but did not tell the reason. So the family decided to sneakily put his diving suit underneath his normal clothing to give their loved one a proper farewell. So the corpse goes into the oven. The neoprene suit catches fire, and if you have ever seen a car tire fire, you know what comes next. Picture the scene. A lovely bit of countryside with lush green fields, birds tweeting, elegant crematorium in the center, with huge, black, billowing clouds of smoke coming out of the chimney to be seen and smelled all over the area. Whoops. The next obvious one is the sneaking of bottles of expensive whiskey in the pockets of the deceased, popular with the Indian population. I won't have to tell you what the combination of an 800 degrees Celsius oven and a bottle of 40% volume booze is an exciting one. Best one was the story of the eco-friendly coffin. This crematorium had a system where the coffin during the ceremony would be lifted with 2 metal forks. The oven door opened. Coffin gets inserted into the oven. Door closes halfway. Forks retract, and the coffin pressing against the door stays in the oven. And finally, the doors close completely. Well, this system is perfect for wooden coffins, but this guy was into his environment, etc., and had an eco-friendly coffin made of some type of recycled cardboard. The forks lift, the oven doors open, the forks slide in, the coffin disintegrates instantaneously when it meets the intense heat of the oven. The door lowers half, the forks retreat, taking the body back outside of the oven. Family and friends are distraught. Staff try with broomsticks to push the corpse back in the oven. Total chaos ensues. Fiancé's hometown developed a wooden-based material, and they promoted it as the 22nd century wood. According to its developers, it was harder and cheaper than wood. First thing they thought it could be used for was as coffin material, starting small before jumping into bridge building. They made the first coffin out of that material, Mediron. Corpse goes into the coffin, priest gives some mass service, family lifts the coffin on their shoulders. Coffin's base breaks in the middle of the street. Corpse falls on the floor. Family is distraught. They had to wait for a normal coffin with their loved one covered with a baseless coffin. The factory that developed the material closed for good, and luckily no bridges were built out of Mediron. I played for a funeral for a fallen RCMP officer. There were 6 uniformed officers standing behind me as I played music for the service. One of the officers stood right behind me and read the lyrics off my sheet music as he sang. It was distracting, but in a good way. It was a nice service. Mostly police and medical emergency crew attended. I kinda have a thing for uniforms. The most memorable was playing for my auntie's funeral. The church was full to the capacity with over 400 people. When asked to perform a solo, I didn't dare look up until I was finished. When I did, I gasped. There were people lined up because all the pews were full. People were lined up in the hall and outside. The entire church was listening to the music, and many had their eyes closed. Seeing my dad and mom watch me as they cried nearly broke my heart. Hardest thing I ever had to do. Even playing at my mom's funeral wasn't as hard. I've never had weird ones, and they're all unique in their own way. The only one that merits a story would be this one. We had a church service planned at 10 a.m., which means family arrives at 9 and our staff at 8. We had a funny saying, hurry up and wait, due to us pushing through everything, then just waiting for hours on end until we need to be involved again. However, this was not such a funeral. We set up in approximately 15 minutes, a ton of stuff. We just have amazing staff. And to our surprise, the family arrived at 8:30. Cool, we can work with it. When the family arrives, we tend to ask if there's anything that should be changed to better suit the family's needs/wants. Yes, there was. Apparently, we had all the wrong pictures in all the wrong places. We had the items we were given placed incorrectly, and even had the casket in the wrong area. Keep in mind that we aren't responsible for any of the pictures or items, they were. Families give anything they want to be displayed during the service to us prior to that day, and the casket was indeed in the correct location. It's a church. There's only one place for it. The family, mainly the deceased wife, was so upset she had to leave. Sucks, but the show must go on. The rest of the family didn't seem to mind, and with a few tweaks and switcheroos, everyone was happy. Come 10 a.m., the public begins to arrive, finally, but no. With the public comes the wife, friends in tow, all carrying huge boxes filled with pictures. She was clearly agitated and going to get her way. And since we care about the families we serve, we always honor the families' requests as much as we possibly can. More pictures? No problem. So during the service, as Father is speaking, there we are, staff and family right next to him, assembling more picture tables. Embarrassing. Funny thing, there was no visitation or graveside that day. So when the service is over, people just go home, meaning the boxes filled with pictures that were brought and rudely assembled during the service were of no use, as nobody got to see them. And as the cherry on top, the wife was still pissed and never paid us. Siblings chipped in some, but we still have an outstanding balance with the family.